China Global Television Network.
Ugandan LRA rebel commander Dominic Ongwen sentenced to 25 years in jail by the ICC. 29 kidnapped students freed in Nigeria's Kaduna after 2 months in captivity. And China accuses the G7 of making groundless allegations and interfering in its domestic affairs. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live, which are linked to gangs locally known as bandits. Ugandan rebel commander Dominic Ongwen has been sentenced to 25 years in jail by the International Criminal Court. Ongwen was found guilty of 61 war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was abducted as a child and rose through the ranks to become a commander of the notorious Lord's Resistance Army. Some of the charges include rape, murder and pillaging. While prosecutors were seeking at least 20 years for the 46-year-old, victims wanted him jailed for life. Well, Dominic Ongwen, as we know, was part of Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda. Since the conflict ended in 2006, hundreds of former captives have returned to the northern Ugandan town of Gulu. And as they attempt to integrate into the community, many still face rejection and stigma. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy has more on their story.
The Lord's Resistance Army's two-decade war against northern Uganda left thousands of people disfigured. The maiming was a tactic used by the LRA to instill fear and punish people. Nancy Awuma is one such young woman who was abducted by the rebels and forced into sexual slavery. She says her refusal to heed to the commands of the rebels saw her ears, mouth, nose and lips sliced off. Reconstruction by doctors have not helped much to relieve her of the pains. Nancy recently saw the very person who sliced off her lips, mouth and ears after he returned from the bush. But she says she has forgiven him of all he did to her.
I saw the person who inflicted the pain in me. He came back from the bush and he lives in a village called Palaro. I have forgiven him for all he did to me.
Another victim, Christina Charo, is from Unyama village in Gulu municipality. She lives with permanent scars of war after rebels burnt her with paraffin and left her for dead. For Christina Charo, forgiveness is simply not on her bucket list.
Since they did not care about the atrocities and the lives of others during the war, they should also be put to death if arrested. Nothing short of that.
Peace has now returned to the region, but those who had their lips, ears, noses and limbs sliced off by the rebels face a new hostility from within their communities.
Even when people abuse me, I look at my 2 children as hope for my future. The fact is that nobody likes me, even my very own people.
Many young men who were forced to commit unspeakable acts while in the bush have now returned and living alongside those they once brutally tormented. Samuel Komakech and Geoffrey Nyeko are ex-LRA rebels who have returned home. They both say they did not intend to kill their victims.
They forced us to go into the villages and loot food. We would go and come back with the loot. They also forced us to kill people.
I may have done many bad things while in the bush unknowingly, but I asked the government and the people I wronged to forgive me so that life can go back to normal.
Uganda's over 2-decade war that ended in 2006 saw the LRA mostly depending on child soldiers who were abducted, indoctrinated and forced to commit horrific murders. An estimated 30,000 children were taken from their homes, forced to live in the wilderness and fight. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Gulu, northern Uganda.
An Indian cargo vessel has been quarantined at Durban Harbour in South Africa after a crew member died from a heart attack. 14 others tested positive for COVID-19. It is unclear at this stage if they may be infected with the variant first discovered in India. The strain has caused a rapid spike in infections and placed the Indian subcontinent at the epicenter of the global pandemic. In an isolated case, another Indian patient is being treated at a Durban hospital. The cases are being investigated to determine the strain. The National Institute of Communicable Diseases has not ruled out the possibility that the variant, which has the ability to break through vaccine immunity, might already be circulating in South Africa. Well, let's bring you more on this. CGTN's Angela Coppola joins us now live from Johannesburg. Angela, certainly worrying news for many in South Africa. Tell us what more do we know about these COVID-19 patients in the detained cargo vessel and what variant they might be carrying.
Well, Lindy, the infected sailors were in fact airlifted off the ship and are currently in isolation at the Itabeni Private Hospital, and that's in Durban. That hospital has been contracted by the shipping industry to look after 6 sailors like these that we've just seen now. We do understand that they are currently being housed in a separate wing in the hospital. We did speak to the health minister's spokesperson a little while ago, who explained that the first sequence that was tested is in fact the B1351 variant, and that's the first variant that was discovered in South Africa late last year. The other tests are still being sequenced at the moment, so we don't have any results available just yet. Meanwhile, as you say, the National Institute of Communicable Diseases has confirmed to date that as of the 3rd of May, that the B167 variant, and that's the one that's in India at the moment, has not been detected in South Africa, and any suspected cases will be investigated. Meanwhile, the Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, reminded the country 2 nights ago that there was no direct flight in from India at any stage at the moment, landing in South Africa, and that all ports of entry were in fact on high alert for arrivals showing symptoms of COVID. So they're keeping a close watch and eye on the situation. This is as we enter the South African winter season with that expected increase in flu pandemic that could happen to us here. So it's early days yet, but no confirmation of the so-called variant coming out of India at the moment. Lindy.
Thank you so much, Angela Coppola. Indeed, that swift response from authorities will possibly keep that variant and an escalation of COVID cases at bay. Now, acute food insecurity around the world soared to a 5-year high in 2020. That's according to the latest annual report by the Global Network Against Food Crises. The report says COVID-19, conflicts, economic shocks, and extreme weather patterns continue pushing millions of people into acute food insecurity. The Global Network Against Food Crises is an alliance between the United Nations, the European Union, and governmental and non-governmental organizations. African countries remain disproportionately affected. Among the most food insecure countries are Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Sudan, northern Nigeria, and the DRC. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso and South Sudan, the report says urgent action is needed to avert widespread death and a collapse of livelihoods. Globally, at least 155 million people faced food insecurity in 2020. That is a shocking 20 million more cases compared to 2019.
Unfortunately, as we move forward, the outlook is not good. We see that the worsening trend in hunger continues. We project that at least 142 million people are expected, continue to expect crisis level or worse of acute food insecurity. In terms of geographic distribution, what strikes is that 10 countries and territories were actually home to 103 million of the 155 million people. So it means over 65% of those in acute food insecurity were just in 10 countries. The DRC, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, northern Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Zimbabwe, and Haiti.
And to some heartwarming news of motherhood. A Malian woman has given birth to 9 babies at once after expecting 7. This has been confirmed by Mali's Minister of Health and the Moroccan clinic where the triplets were born. It appears to be the first time on record that a woman has given birth to 9 surviving babies at once. The 5 girls and 4 boys and their mother are all doing well. The mother, 25-year-old Halima Cisse, gave birth to the babies by cesarean section on Tuesday in Morocco after being sent there for specialized care.
Her condition is stable. She is currently in intensive care. The weight of the babies varied between 500 grams and 1 kilogram. In the mother's case, she was not stable at first because she was bleeding, and we expected this due to the expanding of the uterus. The medical staff were able to find a solution to this case.
Let's turn to international news now. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine in what's seen as a show of support for the Eastern European nation. The trip follows a G7 meeting in London and comes after a weeks-long standoff with Russian troops near Ukraine's eastern border. During the visit, Blinken reaffirmed Washington's commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence. It is the first trip to Kiev by a senior U.S. official under President Joe Biden. In an interview with the BBC, Blinken said the West has to be very careful about the nature of Chinese investments. He said the U.S. was not trying to contain China, but stressed that Washington is in favor of upholding international order based on rules. Well, China has strongly condemned a G7 statement issued after 2 days of face-to-face meetings in London. The statement criticizes Beijing for issues over Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong and Taiwan. It also accuses China of unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. Beijing says the allegations are groundless.
As a group of developed countries, the G7 should take more concrete action in world recovery and helping developing nations instead of stirring up conflict. The G7 includes countries that have been hit by the pandemic, but they also include those with the most advanced medical technology. They should focus on cooperation and the equitable distribution of vaccines, as opposed to hoarding vaccines for their own good. We should not criticize and interfere in other countries' matters with a superiority complex, nor should we undermine the world's current top priority, which is to cooperate to fight the pandemic.
You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Still ahead, surviving climate change. Locals in Zanzibar replenish coral reefs to save the aquatic environment.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change is already started and it's killing us.
It hurts. Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN.
U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, has met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The two discussed a range of issues, including developments in the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam. Feltman's tour of the continent will continue until the 13th of May, with stops in Sudan, Eritrea and Ethiopia. Here's more on his visit to Cairo with CGTN's Adel Al-Makhraoui.
The newly appointed U.S. envoy began a 10-day visit to Africa on Tuesday. Jeffrey Feltman is the special envoy to the Horn of Africa, yet he begins his tour in North Africa, starting with Egypt, then heading to Sudan. A clear sign that the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam talks is a major concern to Washington.
The U.S. envoy's visit shows the growing fears the White House has over the Grand Renaissance Dam talks. It's a sensitive issue that's developing fast, and there's an urgent need for a rapid solution, especially with Ethiopia's preparation to proceed with the second filling of the reservoir in several weeks' time.
Feltman's tour comes after the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for Ethiopia and Eritrea to withdraw their troops from Tigray, a region in Ethiopia that has been witnessing great tension. The special envoy will also be discussing territorial disputes between Ethiopia and Sudan.
The Horn of Africa is one of the most important regions on the continent, yet it's torn with many conflicts. The region needs a strategy to dodge further escalations in these conflicts. Many issues could spark additional tension in the region. I believe the US is trying to formulate a clear strategy to develop Biden's so far shaky policy.
Besides African government officials, the US State Department says Feltman will be extending his talks to include the UN and AU. From the domestic instabilities in Ethiopia to territorial disputes and the Nile water talks, the conflicts in the Horn of Africa are all interlinked. Their repercussions stretch all the way to Egypt. Feltman is not only trying to build a US vision for the region, he's also trying to restore Washington's influence in the Horn of Africa. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The east coast of Africa is rich in coral reefs and marine life, making the Zanzibar Islands an aquatic paradise. In recent years, however, corals have been threatened by climate change, with many beginning to bleach and die. The disappearance of coral reefs also affects fishermen. While to protect the ocean, a group of locals have switched from fishing to coral farming, planting corals and giving back to nature.
Naitwa Abdi Mjakahaji, nimezaliwa Makunduchi na naishi Jambiani. Nipo Jambiani takribani miaka 26 mpaka sasa hivi. Na naipenda bahari kwa sababu toka utotoni kwangu kama nilivyokuwa nachukuliwa na babangu kwenda baharini, kwenda kuona mambo mengi ndani ya bahari. Nikaamua kujishughulisha na harakati zangu za maisha kama vile kuvua kwanza, na nilikuwa nachukuliwa na babangu kwenda kuvua. Nilisikia tu kuwa kuna mzungu anaanzisha mradi fulani wa kuweka kama hifadhi za samaki baharini. Baadaye nikaamua tu kujiunga na mradi wa marine culture ili kujua baadhi ya mambo kwenye bahari.
Marine culture has been founded in 2008 as an NGO in Switzerland and as a branch here in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And since this, we have several projects in aquaculture development and conservation. We try to give an opportunity to people to learn the coral farming and the coral restoration.
Kabla ya kuja hapa, nilikuwa sijui nini coral. Lakini nilipoanza tu kwenda baharini nikajua coral ni nini. Nilipokuwa mara yangu ya kwanza kudive, baada ya kuona zile coral kufa, nilijisikia vibaya sana.
We started to do coral gardening or growing corals to create jobs for the fishermen. The idea was to sell the products to the aquarium market. But then the climate catastrophe came. It was an El Niño year in 2016 that all our corals died.
Matumbawe hutengenezwa na wanyama wadogo wadogo ambao wanaitwa polyps. Ambao hawaonekani kwa macho mpaka kwa vifaa maalum vya kisayansi. Coral ni kiumbe hai kama vilivyo viumbe hai vingine, kwa maana coral inakula, inaishi na pia zinazaa. Au kipindi cha jua kali, maji yanapokuwa moto na coral pia inachuja rangi na baadaye kufa kabisa. Matumbawe hayo hutengenezwa kitu ambacho kinaitwa mwamba wa matumbawe, ambao mwamba huo huvutia wanyama wadogo wadogo na kufanya kama ni makazi yao. Na baadaye wavuvi huwa wanakuja kwenye mwamba huo na kujipatia riziki zao za kuvua samaki kwenye mwamba huo wa matumbawe. Kwa sasa tupo katika soko la samaki ambalo ni la Malindi, na tunajionea jinsi gani samaki wanapopatikana kwa wingi, lakini isitoshe tupo katika samaki wanaopatikana kwa wingi au wanaocheza katika maeneo ya coral ni changu peke yake ambayo ndio anayopatikana kwa wingi, na wanakuwa ni vivutio kwa samaki wakubwa kama tuna au red snapper na wengineo. Lakini vile vile kwa sasa hivi samaki hawapatikani kwa kiasi kikubwa kwa sababu hali ya matumbawe imetoweka au imepotea kabisa. Na tuliamua kuotesha miche ya coral na kurejesha katika hali zao za kawaida. tunakuwa tunaenda baharini kwa kulinda haya matumbawe. Tunakuwa tunapanda coral. Tunaziweka kwenye diski. Na baadaye wiki moja au wiki mbili zinakuwa tayari zishakamata ile diski na zinakuwa tayari zishakuwa kidogo. Takriban mwezi mmoja au miezi miwili tayari zishakuwa za kuenda kutransplanti. Baadhi ya siku zinakuwa zipo chafu, kama zinaingia kama majani fulani hivi, tunachukua miswaki na tunasafisha kwa ajili ya kuwa nzuri zaidi.
This is an ongoing program. So we plant nearly 10,000 new corals every year. And especially we are looking for a high amount of biodiversity, adapt from the nature.
Mpaka sasa hivi nipo hapa marine culture kwa ajili ya kuilinda bahari, na nahakikisha nitailinda bahari mpaka watoto wangu au wajukuu zangu au hata ndugu majirani nao pia wajionee kilichomo ndani ya bahari kama vile coral na samaki.
Your business news coming up next. South Africa's poultry sector remains on high alert amid a bird flu scare. And the Biden administration supports moves to suspend intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Africa's poultry sector says it remains on high alert after recording another case of avian flu on a Gauteng broiler farm. The outbreak, traced to wild birds, was first discovered last month at a layer farm east of the province. But animal health and agricultural authorities have moved quickly to contain a spread. Some neighboring countries that suspended imports from South Africa have also relaxed their bans. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu has more.
SA Poultry believes the avian flu outbreak is contained to 3 affected farms in Gauteng and in the Northwest Province. Authorities are managing to contain the outbreak, drawing on their experience from a devastating outbreak in 2017.
What the Department of Agriculture have done in the past, and also during this outbreak, was to negotiate with the importing countries that import from South Africa for what we call compartmentalization. And that is really something similar to our provinces, where we try to keep certain provinces negative of the disease, and others that might be positive will obviously be banned. So we do have a successful system of compartmentalization. And only 2 compartments are currently registered as positive for the disease.
Lesotho and Swaziland have continued with restrictions on Gauteng imports, while Botswana has lifted some of its restrictions and has agreed to take supplies from unaffected farms. Mozambique continues to import unrestricted.
Various programs or systems were put in place since 2017 to assist us in not getting the disease, firstly, and then secondly, once you get the disease, how we can control the spread of the disease. I think 3 important points here would be that we've got the ability to very quickly react, isolate a farm, and cull the chickens. Those chickens never end up in the market. So that is one very important one. Secondly, we've got a system, a computerized web-based system, where our producers that regularly test for influenza.
This current strain of the disease is highly contagious. Poultry producers remain on high alert, but the agricultural sector, together with animal health, have been quick and efficient in containing a potential wider spread. The initial layer farm where the strain was first discovered was forced to cull around 240,000 birds, while the Northwest broiler farm culled 7,000 birds last week to contain the outbreak. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Zimbabwe recently revised the country's GDP upwards to $24 billion, attributing it to sound financial policies. However, citizens are yet to feel the benefits of this expanding economy. Analysts say the government must commit to implementing its policies. CGTN's Farai Makutuya reports.
A bumper harvest, increased industrial capacity utilization owing to stronger demand for local products under COVID-19 restrictions, falling inflation and a stable currency have been the bedfellows of Zimbabwe's recent economic resurgence.
If you look at some of the crucial indicators in the economy, they seem to be coming right. These indicators have to be watched. There's no doubt about it that there is pressure in the economy, particularly from wage pressures coming through from the civil servants and from ordinary citizens.
Finance Minister Professor Mthuli Ncube says the country is now a $24 billion economy and expects 7.4% growth this year. The numbers, which make good reading on paper, may not translate to the lived reality.
The gap between the rich and poor is actually wider. A lot of people are earning below the poverty datum line, or they're earning amounts which are less, like possibly much less, 80% less than the USD comparatives when we did have the multi-currency. So if it's not flowing to the people, then it's just government that's playing up statistics at the moment.
Some observers say the full impact of the gains will be felt later. To sustain the positive trajectory, authorities have been urged to expedite policies that will increase production in 2 key sectors of the economy. These are agriculture and mining. One will substitute food imports and the other will generate foreign currency. Government also needs to maintain its fiscal discipline.
Government needs to not borrow, particularly from the unsupervised central bank overdraft. Government needs to also get its debts under control and make sure, to coin a well-used frame, live within its means.
The Southern African nation is anticipating a rebound from the COVID-19 crisis as it rolls out an accelerated mass vaccination program. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
China witnessed a strong economic boom in the domestic market during its May Day holiday as local tourists took advantage of the time off to splurge. The spending boom has led to a huge injection in the tourism revenue for the domestic economy. A Zambian government official and an economic expert have applauded China's revenue boom. Let's take a listen.
In China, we have seen up to over 200 million Chinese moving during this holiday, visiting various domestic tourism sites in China. This is a great achievement, and this is key for the growth of the tourism subsector, because this empowers the local community, because the money that they spend the money within the country, domestically. It boosts the domestic economy. And I think this is a classical example and a case that all of us are to learn from, as borders have closed due to COVID-19. So for us to sustain the tourism subsector, domestic tourism is the way to go. And China has demonstrated, and I think it's a case even for us as African countries, we need to learn from.
It is encouraging from what we've seen from the May Day indications, as you mentioned, that it is opening up. So that is quite interesting and encouraging to see. Following the growth, the impact that has been observed through the May event, let us begin to drive that. Let us have that initiative and see Chinese investors come on the ground here in Zambia and start working and cooperating with the Zambian business community.
The Biden administration says it supports waiving patent protection for COVID-19 vaccines. The move would be made through the World Trade Organization. It would make it easier for pharmaceutical companies worldwide to manufacture vaccines. Explaining the decision, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai said the current situation calls for extraordinary measures. And while the administration strongly believes in intellectual property protections, it supports the waiver to end this pandemic. Earlier, we spoke to Ellen Tuhuan. She's a lawyer and public health advocate with expertise in pharmaceutical and intellectual property policies.
The use of mechanisms which are referred to as flexibilities in intellectual property law has been used on a fairly large scale to either produce or import low-cost versions of antiretroviral medicines. Those are the medicines that are needed to treat people with HIV and AIDS. That was done in the early 2000s. And that was as a result also of a decision made at the World Trade Organization. So the discussions today around vaccines and intellectual property are somewhat similar, but the technology is different, and that is why you need that proactive step to, in addition to freeing up the patents, the intellectual property, you need to make sure that the sharing of the know-how takes place. That can happen because the financing of these vaccines, the development of these vaccines, have been largely financed through public financing. Governments have paid for that, which has been absolutely fantastic, and science has come through. But that also means that the people should now own this vaccine. This vaccine should not be in the hands of a few companies that decide who gets to make it and who gets the vaccine in the end.
Canberra has come under increasing criticism over its threat to jail Australian citizens for trying to return home from India. Human rights groups say the harsh measure is racist and violates international law. Greg Navarro reports from Sydney.
In the western Sydney suburb of Harris Park, where nearly half of the people here are of Indian descent, thoughts of the COVID crisis taking place roughly 10,000 kilometres away are never far from the minds of many, including Mahesh Raj.
I am worried about my family because my mom, dads, brothers all are there.
Raj and a lot of people here said the Australian government is adding to that worry and stress. The government has threatened criminal charges against any of the more than 9,000 Australian citizens currently in India who return home.
At the moment in India, if anybody falls sick, I'm not sure what their chances are for securing a bed in ICU or oxygen. And if happens to be Australian citizen, who's going to be answerable to that?
Like many countries, Australia's government has banned travel from India as COVID cases there continue to soar. But after at least 2 people found a loophole and arrived from a third country, the government issued tougher measures. Australian citizens found violating that ban now face up to 5 years in jail and tens of thousands of dollars in fines.
The challenge we're facing here is not just the rampant spread of the pandemic in India, but it has been the accelerated rate of where we've seen infection of people coming from India.
Critics say Australia's harsh ban isn't proportional to its response to serious outbreaks seen in other countries.
Why India? Why brown-skinned Aussies, not white-skinned Aussies? This is, if we were to think that there isn't an element of discrimination or racism to this, being naive and dangerous to not hold the government into account.
Questions are also being raised about whether criminally charging Australians for trying to return home is legal, whether that ban can actually be challenged in the nation's high court.
The first legal challenge has already been lodged in federal court, despite the government's contention that the ban is covered by the country's Biosecurity Act.
The government may be within its right of the Biosecurity Act to put this reform in place, but they are not in their rights within human rights and international law to do so.
Australia's government has softened its approach since announcing the strict ban. Prime Minister Scott Morrison now says it's highly unlikely criminal charges would actually be filed. For people here worried about loved ones stuck overseas, that's not good enough.
Australia should be extracting those people, showing the rest of the world that these are Australian Indians who got stuck there for whatever reason, and we're going to pull our people out. Simple as that.
Australia's government says it will decide whether to extend the ban next week. Rag Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Facebook's oversight board has upheld a decision by the social media giant to ban former US President Donald Trump, at least for the time being. But the board said the company was wrong to make the suspension indefinite, and it gave Facebook 6 months to determine a proportionate response. Trump called the decision and his banning across tech platforms a total disgrace, and he warned the companies would pay a political price. CGTN's Mark New examines the ruling.
Former President Donald Trump's Facebook page is still up, but there have been no posts since January 6th, the day Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. The page will remain suspended after Facebook's oversight board decided to uphold a ban.
Depending on which side of this decision you're on, you're going to view it as either biased or unbiased. So little to do with how this decision was made and everything to do with how the observer perceives it, which is the problem that Facebook is in and why they created the board, so the problem would drift away from Facebook itself.
Facebook's 20-member independent oversight board is made up of academics and experts on everything from journalism to technology to digital rights. They examined this video posted during the Capitol riots that Facebook removed.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
The board cited the words "we love you" and "you're very special" as violating Facebook's rules prohibiting praise or support of people engaged in violence.
It's encouragement. It's encouragement in the same way that we would encourage, somebody who's playing a game that we're cheering on. Way to go. We really love you. You're special. In this case, it was not a game that they were playing. It was a violent insurrection.
The Oversight Board also made a number of recommendations to Facebook, including to rapidly escalate content containing political speech from highly influential users to specialized staff familiar with the context.
The message that I hope this sends is that Facebook and its other social media giants, Twitter and Instagram and others, will be much clearer about the kinds of things that they will allow and disallow. If you look at Trump's response this morning, he's already framing the Facebook decision in terms of rights that he is being denied.
Trump has launched his own social media platform where he's calling actions by Facebook, Twitter, and Google a total disgrace. His new platform, similar to a blog, shows he aims to keep a strong social media presence.
I think his hope is that his supporters will then take those posts and tweet them or post them on Facebook. If those folks do that, they do risk the posts being deleted and being banned. But the issue with regard to the board and even Facebook's moderation stuff is getting by the algorithms and then the humans that are backstopping those algorithms aren't able to step up to the kind of volume a major political party can generate.
Facebook says it was pleased the board recognizes unprecedented circumstances justified their decision, but it says it was inappropriate for Facebook to make the suspension indefinite. It insists Facebook must complete a review within 6 months, so a thorny decision will have to be made by year's end. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
And here's what's coming up in your sports news up next.